I remember the day vividly. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The kind of day where the sunlight slants through the office windows in long, golden shafts, making everything feel almost serene. Almost. My boss, Arthur Sterling, called me into his office. His door was usually open, a performative display of accessibility that fooled precisely no one. But that day, it was closed. Tightly. The air in his office was always a little too warm, smelling faintly of stale coffee and his expensive, cloying cologne. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking like a king on his throne, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He never did. He just launched straight into it, his words clipped and precise, each syllable a tiny hammer blow. He said my contributions were no longer aligned with the company's evolving strategic direction. Evolving strategic direction. It was corporate speak, a bland, unfeeling euphemism designed to strip any personal blame from the executioner and any personal value from the victim. It meant, simply, you're fired. But Arthur, ever the master of veiled aggression, preferred to dress it up in the linguistic equivalent of a straitjacket. My initial reaction was a strange mix of disbelief and a morbid sort of expectation. Part of me, a small, cynical part, had been bracing for something like this for months. The subtle shifts in my project assignments, the increasingly distant nods from Arthur in the hallway, the way my ideas, once embraced, now seemed to wither on the vine of departmental meetings. I kept my face neutral, a skill I had perfected over years of corporate poker. My gaze was steady, meeting his over the polished expanse of mahogany. I felt a faint tremor in my stomach, a cold ripple spreading outward. He continued, detailing a re-evaluation of core competencies and a streamlining of operational redundancies. Each phrase was a carefully chosen weapon, dulling the sharp edge of the truth with layers of bureaucratic fluff. He spoke of my undeniable talent, a fleeting concession that felt more like an insult than a compliment, before pivoting back to the immutable demands of the market and the necessity of difficult decisions. He even managed to weave in a mention of the company's commitment to its employees, a grotesque irony that almost made me smile. Almost. He slid a heavy manila folder across the desk. It contained the standard separation agreement, a non-disclosure clause that would gag acquire, and the details of a severance package. 2 months' salary. A pittance, really, given the years I had poured into that place, the late nights, the sacrificed weekends, the mental gymnastics performed to make his often inane visions seem brilliant. But it was enough to stave off immediate panic. For a moment, I picked up the folder. My fingers felt numb against the thick paper. I looked at him, truly looked at him, not as my boss, but as a man. He was still behind his desk, perfectly coiffed, perfectly tailored, utterly devoid of genuine empathy. He was a product of the system, a cog in the machine that had just ejected me. There was no malice in his eyes, just a cold professional detachment that was almost worse. "Thank you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a little too quiet in the stifling air. I stood up. The chair scraped softly against the carpet. I felt a sudden urge to say something profound, something scathing, something that would puncture his self-satisfied bubble. But what was the point? He wouldn't hear it. He was already moving on to his next strategic realignment. I walked out of his office, pulling the door closed behind me with a gentle click that felt deafeningly loud. My coworkers, a sea of busy heads bent over screens, seemed oblivious. Or perhaps they were just very good at pretending. I wondered how many of them already knew, how many had seen the writing on the wall before I did. The thought was a cold prickle at the back of my neck. Had I been that blind? That complacent? Or had I simply chosen to ignore the signs, burying my head in the comfortable sand of routine and a steady paycheck? Probably a bit of both. We all tell ourselves stories to get through the day, don't we? And mine had been the story of a valuable, indispensable asset, a key player in the grand corporate drama. Apparently the script had been rewritten. The gentle click of the door closing echoed in the sudden silence of my own head. My feet moved automatically, carrying me past the rows of desks, past the glowing screens and the hushed murmurs of productivity. It was a familiar path, one I had trod countless times, in varying states of enthusiasm, exhaustion, and mild existential dread. But today, it felt different. Each step was a deliberate act of severance, a physical cutting of the ties that had bound me to this place for so long. No one looked up. Not really. A few heads might have twitched, a peripheral glance might have registered my solitary departure, but no one met my eyes. We were all too well trained for that. To acknowledge a departing colleague, especially one leaving under these circumstances, was to invite uncomfortable questions, to risk contagion. Better to focus on the pivot table, the quarterly report, the next strategic realignment. Better to be busy, to be essential, to be safe. I reached my own desk, a small island in this sea of industry. My personal effects were already neatly packed into a box, sealed with tape. A final, dehumanizing efficiency. They had clearly anticipated my reaction, or perhaps they simply had a protocol for these things. A standard operating procedure for the disposal of human resources. My mug, a gift from a long-forgotten Christmas. My ergonomic wrist rest, a dog-eared copy of a book I had never quite finished. All reduced to cargo. I picked up a vacation. It was a fundamental shift. The constant striving, the external validation, the relentless pursuit of more. It had all faded into the background, replaced by a quiet appreciation for less, for enough, for the simple act of existing, fully and consciously, in the present moment. The morning sun had indeed felt different, and every hour since had confirmed it. I was no longer merely passing through my life. I was living it, one unhurried breath at a time. The expansive, open space of a brand new day had evolved into the expansive, open space of a brand new life, waiting to be explored, not with a map or a destination in mind, but with an open heart and a curious spirit. I closed my eyes, the soft hum of the refrigerator still the only sound, a gentle counterpoint to the profound peace within me. Tomorrow would bring its own quiet revelations, its own simple joys. And for the first time, in a very long time, I looked forward to it, not with dread, but with a gentle, hopeful smile. My journey had just begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper, and the promise of infinite, unhurried moments. The gentle hum of the refrigerator was indeed the last sound I remembered before drifting into a sleep unlike any I had experienced in years. It was not the heavy, dreamless oblivion of exhaustion, nor the fitful, anxious tossing of a mind preoccupied with tomorrow's burdens. Instead, it was a light, buoyant rest, as if my spirit had simply unmoored itself from the gravitational pull of daily worries and floated freely in a vast, calm ocean. I woke naturally before the alarm had a chance to pierce the stillness, the first rays of dawn painting the bedroom walls in hues of soft rose and nascent gold. There was no jolt, no sudden re-entry into the world, just a slow, gradual unfolding, like a flower opening to the light. My body felt rested, truly rested, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The usual aches and stiffness that had become unwelcome morning companions were absent. Instead, there was a quiet suppleness, a readiness to move without resistance. I stretched languidly, feeling each muscle lengthen, each joint articulate, a small symphony of awakening. The simple act felt luxurious, a privilege rather than a chore. I rose and walked to the window. The world outside was still largely asleep, shrouded in a pearly mist that softened the edges of everything. A lone bird chirped, then another, a tentative overture to the day. I watched the mist slowly dissipate, revealing the familiar contours of the neighborhood, yet seeing them with fresh eyes. The old oak in the yard, its branches gnarled and ancient, seemed to possess a new dignity, a silent wisdom. The neighbor's fence, usually an unremarkable barrier, now appeared as a line drawn by human hands, a testament to effort and intention. Everything was simply what it was, devoid of judgment or expectation, and in that simple acceptance lay a profound beauty. The morning ritual unfolded with a new grace. Brewing coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, was no longer a means to an end, a caffeine fix to jumpstart a reluctant mind. It was an experience in itself. I watched the dark liquid drip into the carafe, listened to the gentle gurgle of the machine, felt the warmth of the mug in my hands. Each sensation was heightened, savored. The first sip was a revelation, not just coffee, but the very essence of comfort, of warmth, of a new beginning. I sat at the kitchen table, no phone in hand, no news headlines flashing across a screen. Just the silence, the coffee, and the unfolding morning. I noticed the way the light fell on the wooden grain of the table, the tiny imperfections in its surface, each telling a story of countless meals, countless moments. My mind, usually a restless current, was now a placid lake, reflecting the quiet beauty around me. Thoughts still arose, of course, but they were like ripples on the surface, appearing and then fading, not dragging me into their depths. I simply observed them, let them pass. This morning felt like a quiet affirmation of the previous day's revelation. The expansive, open space was not merely a fleeting feeling, it was a new way of being. It was not about what I did, but how I did it. It was about presence, about attention, about finding the sacred in the mundane. Later, as I went about the day's small tasks, the feeling persisted. Washing dishes, usually a mindless activity performed with an eye on the clock, became an exercise in mindfulness. I felt the warm water on my hands, the smooth slickness of the soap, the texture of the sponge, the cool porcelain of the plates. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried. The clatter of cutlery was not an annoyance, but a small, sharp sound in the quiet kitchen. Drying them, I saw the reflections in their polished surfaces, distorted miniature worlds. There was no rush to finish, no thought of what came next, just the dishes, the water, my hands, and the present moment, complete and sufficient. Even the act of tidying, a chore I often postponed, took on a gentle rhythm. I picked up a book, felt the weight of it in my hands, admired its cover, and placed it back on the shelf with care. Arranging cushions on the sofa, I smoothed the fabric, feeling its softness. Each item in my home, once just a possession, now seemed to possess its own quiet dignity, its own story. I was not just cleaning. I was engaging with my environment, acknowledging its presence, creating a space of order and calm. The world outside beckoned, not with the urgency of errands, but with the gentle invitation of exploration. I decided to take a walk, not towards any destination, but simply to walk. Stepping out, the air felt different, crisper, more alive. The scent of damp earth and distant blossoms filled my lungs. I noticed the intricate patterns of frost, still clinging to patches of grass in the shade, sparkling like scattered diamonds. The sound of a distant lawnmower, usually an intrusion, was now just a sound, part of the larger symphony of the day. I walked slowly, deliberately, feeling the ground beneath my feet with each step. My gaze was not fixed on the horizon, but drifted, taking in the small details. A ladybug crawling on a leaf, its tiny red shell a vibrant splash against the green, the way the sunlight filtered through the branches of a tree, creating dappled shadows on the pavement, the subtle variations in the bark of different trees, some smooth, some deeply furrowed. I had walked these streets countless times, yet it felt as if I was seeing them for the very first time, stripped of the layers of habit and preconception. My mind was clear, unburdened by the usual commentary, the constant stream of judgments and comparisons. There was no need to label things, to categorize them, to assign them value. A fallen leaf was simply a fallen leaf, its intricate veins a testament to its brief, beautiful life. A child's laughter from a nearby yard was simply laughter, pure and unadulterated joy. I was not thinking about these things. I was simply experiencing them. This unhurried pace extended beyond my physical movements. My thoughts, too, seemed to slow down, to expand. I found myself pondering the nature of time itself. For so long, I had lived as if time was a scarce resource, something to be managed, optimized, filled to the brim. Now, it felt abundant, an endless expanse. There was no need to rush, no need to chase. Time was not something I possessed or controlled. It was simply the medium in which life unfolded. And in this new understanding, there was a profound sense of liberation. The concept of doing also took on a new meaning. Before, my worth felt intrinsically linked to my productivity, to the list of accomplishments I could tick off. Now, simply being felt like the most profound act of all. To be present, to be aware, to be alive in this moment. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Returning home, I prepared a simple lunch. A piece of toast, some fresh fruit, a glass of water. Each element was chosen not for its nutritional value or its convenience, but for its simple goodness. I toasted the bread slowly, watching its color change, feeling the subtle warmth emanating from the toaster. The scent of billing bread filled the kitchen, a primal comfort. Spreading butter, I noticed its creamy texture, its pale yellow hue. Each bite of toast was savored, the crunch, the warmth, the subtle flavor of the grain. The sweetness of the fruit was exquisite, its juice bursting on my tongue. Even the water, clear and cool, felt like a vital, refreshing gift. Eating was no longer a hurried refueling, a task to be completed between other tasks. It was a communion, a moment of nourishing myself, body and spirit. I ate slowly, mindfully, allowing my senses to fully engage with the experience. There was no television, no phone, no book. Just the food, the quiet, and the gentle rhythm of chewing and swallowing. As the afternoon light softened, casting long shadows across the floor, I settled into a comfortable chair by the window. I picked up a book, not one I felt obliged to read, but one that simply called to me. I opened it at random, letting my eyes fall upon a passage. The words seemed to resonate with a new depth, as if my internal landscape had finally aligned with their wisdom. I read without haste, allowing the sentences to unfold, the ideas to sink in, without rushing to the next paragraph, the next chapter. The quiet hum of my home was a constant, comforting presence. It was the sound of life continuing, gently, unobtrusively. I noticed the way the light shifted minute by minute, transforming the familiar corners of the room. Dust motes danced in a sunbeam, tiny universes in miniature. The world outside, with its incessant demands and distractions, felt distant, a faint echo. Here, in this space of quiet contemplation, I was safe, whole, and utterly at peace. The evening brought its own gentle revelations. As dusk settled, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I simply watched. The transition from day to night, often missed in the rush of evening chores, was now a spectacle, a grand, silent drama. The first star appeared, a pinprick of light in the deepening blue, then another, and another, until the sky was dusted with their distant glow. There was no need for grand pronouncements, no desire for elaborate entertainment. The simple beauty of the natural world was more than enough. I prepared a simple dinner, again with the same mindful attention. The chopping of vegetables, the sizzle of oil in the pan, the aroma of herbs, each step was a deliberate act of creation, a small celebration of sustenance. The food tasted vibrant, alive, imbued with the quiet energy of my presence. As night fully descended, I found myself sitting in the living room, the only light coming from a soft lamp. I did not feel the need to fill the silence with noise, to distract myself from the quietude. Instead, I embraced it, letting it envelop me. My thoughts were few, mostly observations, gentle reflections. There was no inner monologue of self-criticism or anxiety, no rehashing of past mistakes, no planning for a distant future, just the quiet spaciousness of being. This was not an escape from reality. It was an immersion into a deeper reality. It was a recognition that life was not something to be conquered or controlled, but something to be experienced, moment by moment, with an open heart and a curious spirit. The journey had indeed begun with a whisper, and that whisper was now a gentle, pervasive presence, guiding me through each unfolding hour. Days turned into a week, then two, and the feeling did not wane. It deepened. The initial revelation had been a sudden burst of light, a profound shift in perspective. Now it was like a slow, steady dawn, illuminating more and more of the landscape of my life. Each day brought new opportunities to practice this new way of being, to integrate it more fully into the fabric of my existence. I noticed how my interactions with others began to subtly change. When I encountered someone, whether at the grocery store or during a brief phone call, I found myself truly listening. Not just waiting for my turn to speak, not formulating my response while they were still talking, but truly hearing their words, sensing their presence. There was a genuine curiosity, an openness that had been absent before, and in return, I found that people seemed to respond differently to me, with a similar openness. Connections, however brief, felt more authentic, more real. The impatience that had once been a constant companion, the frustration with delays or inefficiencies, had largely dissolved. If a line was long, I simply observed the people around me, or let my gaze drift to the play of light and shadow. If a task took longer than expected, I embraced the extra time as an opportunity for deeper engagement. The internal clock that had once dictated my every move, pushing me ever onward, had slowed to a gentle, natural rhythm. I rediscovered the joy of simple creativity. I found myself sketching in a notebook, not with any intention of producing a masterpiece, but simply for the pleasure of putting pencil to paper, of observing the world and translating it into lines and shapes. I experimented with new recipes, not following them rigidly, but allowing my intuition to guide me, savoring the process of combining ingredients, of transforming raw elements into something delicious. These were not pursuits I had consciously chosen to take up. They simply arose naturally from the wellspring of this new, unhurried existence. My relationship with nature grew stronger, more intimate. I spent more time outdoors, not just walking, but simply sitting, observing. I watched the birds build their nests, the insects busily going about their lives, the clouds drift across the sky in ever-changing formations. There was a deep sense of belonging, a feeling of being intricately connected to the larger web of life, rather than being a separate, isolated entity. The wind rustling through the leaves, the distant murmur of water, the warmth of the sun on my skin, these were not just external phenomena. They were experiences that resonated deep within me, confirming my place in the world. The incessant need for external validation, for approval from others, had faded into insignificance. My sense of worth no longer derived from my achievements, my possessions, or my status. It came from within, from the quiet knowing that I was enough, just as I was in this moment. This inner freedom was perhaps the most profound gift of all, liberating me from the exhausting cycle of striving and comparing. There were moments, of course, when the old habits of mind would try to reassert themselves. A fleeting worry about the future, a momentary regret about the past, a brief flicker of judgment. But now, these thoughts were quickly recognized for what they were. Mere echoes, not commands. I could observe them without getting entangled, acknowledge their presence without letting them define my experience. They were like clouds passing across the sky, momentarily obscuring the sun, but never truly diminishing its light. This new way of living was not about escaping problems or avoiding challenges. Life still presented its complexities, its moments of discomfort or uncertainty. But now, I approached them with a different posture. Instead of reacting with fear or resistance, I met them with a quiet acceptance, a willingness to simply be with what was, to observe, to learn, to respond from a place of calm rather than panic. The expansive, Open space was not an absence of difficulty, but an inner container vast enough to hold it all, without being overwhelmed. I often found myself reflecting on the concept of home. For so long, home had been a physical place, a shelter, a collection of possessions. Now home felt like an internal state, a sanctuary I carried within me. Regardless of where I was, it was the feeling of being fully present, fully alive, fully at peace. My physical home, with its quiet hum and gentle light, was merely an outward manifestation of this inner sanctuary, a place where I could cultivate and deepen this profound sense of belonging to myself. The promise of infinite, unhurried moments was not an exaggeration. Each moment, when fully embraced, felt infinite in its depth, in its potential for experience. There was no need to rush towards a future that might never arrive, no need to cling to a past that was already gone. There was only this rich, vibrant, ever-present now. And in this now, everything I needed was already here. My journey had indeed just begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper that had grown into a clear, steady voice within me. It was the voice of my true self, unburdened by the noise and expectations of the world. And with each passing day, I listened more closely, followed its gentle guidance more willingly, stepping further into the expansive, open space of a life truly lived, one unhurried breath at a time. The future remained unwritten, its details unknown, but for the first time, that uncertainty was not a source of anxiety, but a canvas of infinite possibility. The canvas of infinite possibility was not an invitation to paint a masterpiece of grand achievements, but rather to dabble in the quiet hues of daily existence, each stroke a conscious choice, each color a feeling embraced. I found myself drawn not to the loud demands of the world, but to its softest whispers. My days began to unfold with a new rhythm, one dictated not by clocks or calendars, but by the subtle stirrings within me. There was a profound joy in the simplicity of this new life. I discovered a deep connection to the natural world around me, a connection I had previously overlooked in my haste to conquer or control. The rustle of leaves in the wind became a symphony, the dance of sunlight on water a mesmerizing performance. I spent hours simply observing, allowing the intricate patterns of nature to imprint themselves upon my awareness. A tiny ant meticulously carrying a crumb, a spider weaving its delicate web with unwavering precision, the slow, silent growth of a plant reaching towards the sun, each held a lesson, a reflection of the patient, persistent flow of life itself. My physical space, once merely a backdrop for my busy mind, transformed into a sanctuary. I cleared away clutter, not with a sense of obligation, but with a gentle desire to create more space, both literally and figuratively. Each item I chose to keep was imbued with purpose, or beauty, or both. The act of tidying became a meditation, a way of honoring my surroundings and, by extension, myself. I found that an uncluttered environment fostered an uncluttered mind, allowing for even greater clarity and presence. Food, too, took on a new dimension. No longer a hurried necessity or a source of emotional comfort, it became an act of conscious nourishment. I learned to appreciate the textures, the flavors, the very act of preparing a meal. Sourcing fresh, local ingredients, chopping vegetables with mindful precision, savoring each bite. These simple actions became rituals of gratitude, connecting me to the earth and to the sustenance it provided. My body, previously a vehicle for my ambitions, was now a cherished vessel, deserving of care and respect. The concept of time itself seemed to warp and expand. Without the constant pressure to achieve or perform, moments stretched out, rich and full. A single afternoon could hold the depth of what once felt like a week. I read books not to finish them but to savor each sentence, allowing the words to resonate within me. I wrote, not with an audience in mind, but as a conversation with my own soul, a way to articulate the ever-evolving landscape of my inner world. These were not tasks to be completed, but experiences to be fully inhabited. Sometimes, The old habits of thought would attempt to resurface. A fleeting worry about the future, a pang of regret about the past, a sudden urge to compare myself to others. But now, these thoughts were no longer masters, but transient visitors. I had learned to observe them without judgment, to acknowledge their presence without giving them power. They would arrive, be seen, and then, like clouds drifting across the sky, they would pass, leaving behind the vast, clear expanse of my awareness. This was not a battle, but a gentle dance of acceptance and release. My interactions with other people, though fewer, became more profound. When I did engage, it was with a quality of presence that had been absent before. I listened not just to the words being spoken, but to the emotions underlying them, to the unspoken narrative. Conversations became opportunities for genuine connection, for shared humanity, rather than platforms for self-promotion or superficial exchange. I found that when I approached others with an open heart and a quiet mind, they often responded in kind, revealing a depth that I had previously been too distracted to perceive. There was no longer a need to impress, to prove, or to seek validation. My worth was inherent, and that understanding allowed me to simply be, authentically, with whomever I encountered. One day I felt a gentle pull towards a new endeavor, something that had always intrigued me but felt impractical in my old life. It was the art of pottery. The idea of working with raw earth, shaping it with my hands, and transforming it through fire, resonated deeply with my evolving understanding of creation and transformation. I found a small, local studio that offered classes, a quiet space filled with the earthy scent of clay and the soft hum of the potter's wheel. My first attempts were clumsy, as expected. The clay resisted, collapsing under my uneven pressure, wobbling off-center. Frustration, a familiar old companion, tried to creep in. But this time, I met it differently. I didn't fight it, didn't judge myself. Instead, I observed the frustration, acknowledged its presence, and then returned my attention to the clay, to the feel of it between my fingers, to the steady rotation of the wheel. Each failed attempt was not a mistake, but a lesson, a gentle guide, showing me where to adjust my touch, my breath, my intention. The process itself became a powerful metaphor for my life. The clay, initially formless and yielding, required patience, centeredness, and a steady hand to be shaped. The firing process, intense and transformative, solidified its form, making it resilient. And the final glaze, adding beauty and protection, was like the grace that infused my present existence. There was no rushing the process, no forcing an outcome. Each stage had its own time, its own demands, its own beauty. I learned to surrender to the rhythm of the work, to trust the material, and to trust my own unfolding ability. Through pottery, I discovered a new form of meditation, a way to anchor myself even more deeply in the present moment. The cool, damp clay, the rhythmic spinning of the wheel, the gentle pressure of my hands. It all demanded absolute attention. My mind, which once raced with 1,000 thoughts, I found quietude in the focused concentration required. Hours would pass unnoticed, and I would emerge from the studio feeling refreshed, centered, and filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment, not because of a perfect pot, but because of the perfect presence I had cultivated. This journey was not about abandoning the world, but about engaging with it more fully, more authentically. It was about choosing connection over isolation, presence over distraction, and inner peace over external validation. I found that the world, when approached from this place of inner calm, responded in kind. Opportunities not of grand ambition but of genuine resonance began to appear. People, drawn to the quiet energy I now carried, would engage me in conversations that went beyond the superficial. I realized that the whisper that had started this journey had indeed grown into a clear, steady voice, but it was not a voice that shouted commands. It was a voice that offered gentle suggestions, intuitive nudges, guiding me not towards a predefined destination, but along a path of continuous discovery. The future remained unwritten, yes, but now I understood that I was not merely a passive observer of its unfolding. I was an active participant, an artist with a brush, painting each moment with the colors of conscious awareness, shaping my reality with the gentle hands of presence. The concept of purpose, which had once felt like a heavy burden, demanding a grand external mission, now transformed into something far more intimate and profound. My purpose was simply to be fully present, to live each moment with an open heart and a curious mind, to embrace the unfolding experience of life itself. It was not about what Ingenious, but about how Ingenious was. This understanding brought with it an immense sense of liberation. There was nothing to chase, nothing to prove, nothing to become other than what I already was, in this very moment. This liberation extended to my relationship with fear. Fear, in its various guises, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown, had once been a constant undercurrent in my life, subtly dictating my choices and limiting my experiences. Now, when fear arose, it was like a distant echo, a faint memory of an old habit. I could observe it, acknowledge its presence and understand its root, but it no longer held the power to paralyze me. I saw it for what it was, a story my mind was telling itself, a projection onto a future that might never arrive. And with that understanding, its grip loosened, allowing me to move forward with a quiet courage, guided by intuition rather than propelled by anxiety. The expansive, open space of a life truly lived was not a void, but a fertile ground. It was a space where creativity flourished naturally, where insights arose spontaneously, and where a deep sense of contentment permeated every experience. I found myself drawn to learning new things, not out of a desire for external accomplishment, but from a genuine curiosity about the world and its wonders. I explored philosophy, history, and the natural sciences, not through formal study, but through a gentle, self-directed inquiry. Each piece of knowledge felt like a thread woven into the rich tapestry of my understanding, deepening my appreciation for the intricate interconnectedness of all things. I also began to notice the subtle shifts in the world around me, reflections of my own internal transformation. The hurried pace of others, which once felt like a personal failing, now simply existed as an external phenomenon, observed without judgment or internal comparison. I no longer felt the need to keep up, to compete, or to conform. My own pace was my own, and it was perfectly aligned with the rhythm of my being. This inner alignment created a kind of energetic shield, deflecting the external pressures that once caused so much stress. The distinction between work and play blurred. What I did each day, whether it was tending my small garden, shaping clay, reading, or simply walking in nature, was infused with the same quality of presence and enjoyment. There was no longer a division between activities I had to do and activities I wanted to do. Everything was simply an opportunity to be, to engage, to experience. This holistic approach to living brought a profound sense of integration and wholeness. My life was not segmented into roles or responsibilities, but flowed as a continuous, unified expression of my true self. This deep sense of self-acceptance was perhaps the most profound gift of this journey. For so long, I had sought acceptance from external sources, from achievements, from relationships, from societal approval. Now I understood that true acceptance had to come from within. It was the unconditional embrace of my own being, with all its strengths and perceived weaknesses, its light and its shadows. This inner acceptance created an unshakable foundation, a sanctuary that I carried with me wherever I went. The unhurried breath became more than just a technique. It became a way of life. Each inhale was an acceptance of the present moment. Each exhale, a release of what no longer served. It was a constant, gentle reminder to return to the now, to the simple act of being. In this continuous cycle of breath, I found an infinite wellspring of peace, resilience, and joy. The future remained unwritten, its details unknown, but for the first time, that uncertainty was not a source of anxiety, but a canvas of infinite possibility, and I, the artist, was finally ready to paint. Not with grand gestures, but with the quiet, deliberate strokes of a life lived fully, one unhurried, infinitely present moment at a time. The journey was not about reaching a destination, but about savoring every step along the way, and in that savoring I found everything I had ever sought. The world, once a place of striving and struggle, had transformed into a playground of discovery, an endless expanse. The box. It was surprisingly light, considering it contained the remnants of 5 years of my life. The lift ride down was interminable. I shared it with a young woman from marketing, her phone pressed to her ear, animatedly discussing conversion rates. Her voice was bright, full of the future. I stood silently, a ghost already, observing her vibrant presence. The numbers on the display descended slowly, each floor a small eternity. Ground floor. The doors hissed open. The lobby was a blur of polished marble and hurried footsteps. The revolving door spun me out onto the street, into the indifferent embrace of the city. The air, usually a welcome relief from the recycled office chill, felt suddenly heavy, thick with exhaust fumes and the clamor of 1,000 unrelated lives. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised orange and purple. A beautiful, indifferent spectacle. I started walking, not towards the bus stop, not towards the train station, but simply walking. My feet found their own rhythm, a slow, aimless shuffle. The box, light as it was, grew heavier with every step, a tangible symbol of my sudden unemployment. I passed cafes buzzing with after-work chatter, shops displaying glittering wares, people hurrying home, their faces etched with the day's weariness or the anticipation of evening plans. I was no longer part of that flow. I was an eddy, a stray current, separated from the main stream. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull ache, a hollow space where my professional identity used to reside. It was not anger, not yet, and not despair. It was more like a quiet bewilderment, how quickly it had all evaporated. The late nights, the early mornings, the strained collaborations, the small victories, the endless meetings, all dissolved into nothing more than a memory, a bullet point on a CV that now felt suddenly obsolete. I found myself in a small park, a patch of green surrounded by the towering concrete and glass of the city. I sat on a bench, placing the box carefully beside me. Children shrieked with laughter in the playground, their energy boundless, their concerns delightfully trivial. An old man fed pigeons, his movements slow and deliberate. Life, in all its messy, vibrant glory, continued unabated. My own personal earthquake had barely registered a tremor in the grand scheme of things. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts list. Who to tell first? My parents? My sister? My friend, Mark. Each name brought with it a different set of expectations, a different kind of sympathy or concern. My parents would worry, of course. My sister would offer pragmatic advice, probably laced with a few choice words about corporate greed. Mark would probably just suggest a beer. None of it felt right. Not yet. I needed to process this first, to find some internal equilibrium before I could face the external reactions. I of wonder, all within the boundless space of my own awakened consciousness. And the whisper, now a steady, clear voice, continued to guide me, not with demands, but with an invitation to simply be, to experience, to live. This was not the end of a journey, but the joyous, eternal beginning of a life truly lived. The initial feeling was one of boundless expansion, as if the very edges of my being had dissolved into the air, into the light, into the quiet hum of existence. It was not a fleeting euphoria, but a deep, abiding resonance that settled into the core of my bones, a constant, gentle thrumming that accompanied every breath. The world, once a collection of separate objects and events, now presented itself as an intricate, shimmering tapestry, each thread connected, each color vibrant, each pattern meaningful. My perception had undergone a fundamental shift, moving from a narrow, self-centered lens to a panoramic vista of interconnectedness. Every morning, the waking process was no longer a reluctant return to obligation, but a joyous unfurling. My eyes would open to the soft light filtering through the window, and I would feel a profound gratitude simply for the act of seeing, for the colors, for the textures, for the dance of dust motes in the sunbeams. There was no rush to begin the day, no mental checklist of tasks to be conquered. Instead, I would lie still for a while, allowing the awareness of my own breath to anchor me, feeling the subtle pulse of life within, the rhythmic beating of my heart, the quiet stirrings of my own consciousness. This was not idleness. It was a sacred pause, a deliberate act of tuning in, of aligning myself with the gentle current of the present moment before I even moved. The simplest actions became imbued with a new significance. Preparing a cup of tea was no longer a means to an end, but a meditation. The warmth of the mug in my hands, the aromatic steam rising, the delicate clinking of the spoon as I stirred, the first sip warming my throat. Each sensation was savored, a miniature universe of experience unfolding in exquisite detail. Eating a meal became a communion with the earth, a recognition of the sun and rain and soil that had nourished the food, and the hands that had prepared it. Every bite was an act of gratitude, a mindful engagement with the sustenance that fueled this miraculous vessel I inhabited. The flavors were richer, the textures more pronounced, as if my senses had been recalibrated to a higher frequency. Conversations, too, took on a deeper quality. The urge to interrupt, to formulate my next response while another spoke, had evaporated. Instead, I found myself truly listening, not just to the words, but to the unspoken emotions, the subtle nuances of tone, the silent narratives hidden beneath the surface. It was as if I could perceive the deeper current of humanity flowing through each interaction, recognizing the shared desires, the common struggles, the universal longing for connection and understanding. Judgment, once a subtle, almost unconscious habit, had receded, replaced by a profound empathy, a recognition of the inherent goodness and vulnerability in every being. When I looked into another's eyes, I saw not a separate entity, but a reflection of the same boundless consciousness that animated me, a fellow traveler on this grand journey. The world still presented its array of challenges, its moments of discomfort or sorrow. The news still carried tales of suffering, personal setbacks still arose, the body still experienced minor aches or fatigue. But the internal landscape had shifted dramatically in how these were met. There was no longer a desperate grasping for control, no frantic attempt to push away the unpleasant or cling to the pleasant. Instead, there was a spacious acceptance, a quiet understanding that these experiences were simply part of the ebb and flow of life, transient waves on the vast ocean of existence. Pain was acknowledged, felt, but not identified with. It was an experience passing through, not a definition of who I was. The whisper, now a steady, clear voice within, reminded me that even in discomfort, there was a lesson, an opportunity for deeper compassion, for greater resilience, for a more profound understanding of the impermanent nature of all things. My relationship with nature deepened beyond anything I had known before. A walk in the woods was no longer just exercise. It was an immersion. The rustle of leaves underfoot, the earthy scent of damp soil, the intricate patterns of bark on ancient trees, the patient stillness of a stone, each element spoke volumes. I felt a kinship with the trees, their deep roots mirroring my own grounding, their reaching branches a symbol of aspiration. The flight of a bird became a lesson in effortless movement, the flow of a river, a testament to persistent, gentle progress. I understood, not intellectually but viscerally, that I was not separate from this intricate web of life, but an integral part of it, my own breath harmonizing with the breath of the planet. The boundaries between self and environment blurred, and in that blurring, I found an immense sense of belonging, a profound peace in being part of something so vast and ancient. This new way of being did not demand a grand external purpose or a specific creative output, though moments of spontaneous expression did arise. Sometimes it was a sudden urge to hum a melody, or to arrange flowers in a particularly pleasing way, or to write a few words that captured a fleeting insight. But the primary creativity was in the living itself. Each day became a canvas, each moment a brushstroke. The art was in the mindful attention, the compassionate response, the joyful embrace of what is. My purpose, I realized, was not something to be sought or achieved, but something to be embodied. It was the purpose of simply being, of radiating peace and presence, of living as an open channel for the boundless love and wisdom that flowed through all things. My body, once a source of occasional frustration or a tool to be pushed and disciplined, became a cherished companion, a wise teacher. I listened to its subtle signals, honoring its need for rest, for movement, for nourishment. The sensations within it were no longer just physical data, but messages. Whispers from a deeper intelligence, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the invigorating rush of cool water, the stretch of muscles after sleep. These were not trivialities, but profound experiences, grounding me in the immediate reality of my physical existence. I moved with a new fluidity, a gentle grace that stemmed from an inner stillness. My breath became a constant guide, a bridge between the inner and outer worlds, a continuous reminder of the life force that animated me. Even sleep and dreams underwent a transformation. Sleep was deeper, more restorative, a complete surrender to the unconscious. Dreams, when they arose, were often vivid and symbolic, not disturbing or chaotic, but like gentle narratives from the subconscious, offering insights or simply beautiful imagery. There was no longer any anxiety about the coming day, no mental chatter carrying over into the night. It was a complete letting go, a trusting surrender to the natural rhythm of rest and renewal. Waking felt like a fresh birth, a clean slate, each morning a new opportunity to experience the wonder of being. Learning and growth, I understood, were not about accumulating more knowledge or achieving specific milestones, but about a continuous unfolding, a deepening of awareness. The journey was indeed eternal, not in the sense of endless striving, but as an infinite exploration of the present moment. There was always more to perceive, more to understand, more to love. Each interaction, each observation, each quiet moment of reflection offered a new facet of truth, a deeper layer of understanding. The joy was in this perpetual discovery, in the ever-expanding awareness of the richness and complexity of existence. The fear that had once subtly underpinned so many of my actions, fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of not being enough, had gently dissolved. It wasn't that I was oblivious to potential difficulties, but the emotional charge around them had dissipated. There was an understanding that even in loss there was transformation, even in endings, new beginnings. Attachment, too, had loosened its grip. I could appreciate beauty, enjoy experiences, cherish relationships, without the accompanying anxiety of their potential impermanence. Everything was seen as a gift, to be received with open hands and released with grace when its time came. This freedom from attachment was not indifference. It was a profound love that embraced the transient nature of all things, finding beauty in their fleeting dance. From this vantage point, I saw the broader perspective, the cosmic dance in which everything played its part. The smallest atom, the most distant galaxy, the fleeting moment of my own breath, all were interconnected, all part of a magnificent, unfolding mystery. The ego, once a demanding taskmaster, had softened, becoming a gentle instrument of perception, no longer dictating reality but observing it with quiet awe. I understood that my individual consciousness was but a ripple on the vast ocean of universal consciousness, unique and yet inseparable, a singular expression of the divine. The whisper, which had once been a faint, almost unheard plea for attention, then a guiding voice, had now become so integrated into my being that it was less a separate voice and more the very essence of my own wisdom, the quiet knowing that resided beneath all thought. It was the silent understanding that guided my steps, informed my choices, and permeated my every interaction. It was the deep, unwavering truth of who I was, stripped of all conditioning, all fear, all illusion. This was not an arrival at a static destination, but a joyous, eternal beginning, a perpetual unfolding of discovery, a vibrant tapestry, woven anew with each passing moment, yet eternally complete. It was an endless becoming, not a striving for some future perfection, but a deep, resonant inhabiting of the now, where every breath was a sacrament, every perception a revelation. The world, once a collection of separate objects and events, now vibrated as a single, indivisible whole, a symphony of existence in which I was both the conductor and a single, harmonious note. The illusion of separation, that deep-seated belief in a distinct self utterly divorced from all else, had dissolved like mist in the morning sun. There was no longer an inner me observing an outer world. Instead, there was a seamless continuum, a vast, unbounded field of awareness in which all phenomena arose and subsided. The chirping of a bird outside my window, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the sensation of my skin against the fabric of my clothes, even the subtle undulations of my own thoughts, all were expressions of this singular consciousness flowing through me, as me, and around me. My individual identity had not vanished entirely, but it had transmuted. It was no longer a fortress, but a window, transparent and open, allowing the light of universal truth to stream through unimpeded. This profound shift meant that fear, once a shadow that dogged my steps, had lost its grip. It was not that fear itself ceased to exist as a potential human experience, but its power to define or control me had evaporated. When a flicker of apprehension arose, it was observed with the same quiet acceptance as any other passing sensation, like a cloud drifting across a clear sky. It was seen for what it was, an energetic imprint, a transient phenomenon, not a fundamental truth about my being. There was no longer a need to fight it, suppress it, or even understand its origins in the old intellectual sense. It simply arose, was acknowledged without judgment, and then dissolved back into the vastness from which it came, leaving behind not a trace of disturbance, but a deeper sense of peace. Similarly, the endless cycle of desire and aversion that had once driven so much of my life had quieted. This was not a state of apathy or indifference, but rather a profound contentment that required nothing outside of itself to be complete. Desires still arose, certainly, a longing for beauty, for connection, for simple comforts, but they were no longer imbued with the desperate urgency of attachment. They were seen as natural currents within the flow of life, to be experienced and engaged with if alignment felt true, but without the suffering that came from clinging to outcomes or fearing their absence. There was a deep trust in the unfolding, an understanding that all that was needed was already present or would manifest in perfect timing. The whisper, now indistinguishable from my own deepest knowing, guided every action, every non-action, with an effortless grace. It was not a voice giving instructions, but a subtle resonance, a felt sense of rightness that preceded and permeated thought. Decisions were no longer fraught with analysis paralysis or second-guessing. Instead, they emerged spontaneously, organically, from a place of quiet certainty. It was like watching a flower open to the sun, a natural, unforced movement in perfect harmony with its environment. There was no internal debate, no mental wrestling match between conflicting impulses. There was simply the clear, unobstructed path, revealed in the moment, for the moment. This clarity extended to my interactions with others. The mental filters of judgment, expectation, and projection that had once colored my perceptions of people had largely fallen away. Each individual was seen as a unique expression of the same universal consciousness, a fellow traveler on this magnificent journey. Empathy flowed effortlessly, not as a conscious effort to understand another's pain, but as a direct recognition of our shared essence. Their joy was my joy, their sorrow a resonance within the broader field of compassion. Conversations unfolded with a profound authenticity, free from the need to impress, to defend, or to control. There was a simple, open presence, a willingness to meet each person exactly where they were, without agenda. The boundaries that had once defined my relationships, the subtle walls of self-protection, the unspoken contracts of expectation, had softened, allowing for a deeper, more unconditional connection. The concept of time itself had undergone a radical transformation. The past no longer held the weight of regret, nor the future, the anxiety of anticipation. Both were understood as mental constructs, projections of the mind onto the eternal present. There was only this moment, infinitely expansive, infinitely deep. Memories arose when relevant, not as burdens to be relived, but as data points in the vast cosmic library. Plans for the future were made with a light touch, an understanding that they were merely provisional maps for a journey whose true unfolding remained gloriously unknown. The urgency that once characterized my days had dissipated, replaced by a rhythm of being that was both vibrant and serene. Each activity, whether it was preparing a meal, walking in nature, or engaging in creative work, was imbued with a sense of sacred presence, a full immersion in the task at hand. There was no rushing, no yearning for the next moment, only the rich fullness of the one unfolding. My body, once a source of occasional discomfort, or a project to be managed, had become a beloved vessel, a direct conduit to the living intelligence of the universe. I felt its subtle energies, its intricate dance of cells and systems, with a new sensitivity. It was no longer a separate entity, but an integral part of the earth, breathing with the trees, flowing with the rivers, grounded in the very fabric of existence. Pain, when it arose, was no longer resisted but met with a gentle awareness, a curiosity that allowed it to be experienced without compounding it with mental suffering. Healing seemed to occur with a newfound ease, as if the body's innate wisdom, no longer overshadowed by the clamor of the ego, could operate unimpeded. Nourishment, movement, rest, these became intuitive acts, guided by the body's own intelligence, rather than by external rules or mental dictates. This joyous, eternal beginning was not a passive state of blissful inaction. On the contrary, it was a dynamic, creative engagement with life, an active participation in the grand cosmic dance. The energy that had once been consumed by internal conflict, by striving and resisting, was now liberated, channeled into acts of creation, service, and pure being. Inspiration flowed freely, unhindered by self-doubt or the need for external validation. Whether it was a simple act of kindness, a moment of profound contemplation, or the unfolding of a creative project, everything was imbued with a sense of purpose and effortless joy. There was no longer a distinction between work and play, between effort and ease. All became an integrated expression of this luminous awareness. The natural world became an even more profound teacher and mirror. Each leaf, each stone, each cloud formation held within it the same universal truth that resonated within me. I could sit for hours observing the intricate patterns of a spider's web, the tireless industry of an ant colony, or the majestic silence of a mountain, and feel an absolute unity with it all. There was no need for interpretation or intellectual analysis. The understanding was direct, intuitive, felt in the very core of my being. The boundaries between species, between organic and inorganic, between living and non-living, dissolved into a singular, vibrant continuum. Everything was alive, everything was conscious, everything was a manifestation of the divine. This understanding was not a belief system to be defended or propagated, but a lived reality, a direct experience that permeated every fiber of my existence. It was beyond words, beyond concepts, yet it informed every word and every concept that arose. Attempts to articulate it often felt inadequate. like trying to capture the vastness of the ocean in a teacup. Yet, there was also a natural inclination to share this truth, not through proselytizing, but through simply being, through the resonance of one's own presence. The quiet knowing that had become my essence was a beacon, not demanding attention, but radiating peace, inviting others to remember the same truth within themselves. The process of unfolding was continuous. It wasn't that I had reached an ultimate peak and now simply resided there. Rather, each moment brought a deeper layer of revelation, a more nuanced understanding, a further expansion of consciousness. It was like climbing a mountain whose summit continually receded, not out of frustration, but out of a joyous recognition that the journey itself was the destination. There were no more aha moments in the dramatic sense, but rather a gentle, continuous, oh yes, a deepening recognition of what was always already true. The universe, in its infinite generosity, continued to reveal itself, layer by layer, in endless complexity and breathtaking simplicity. The sense of isolation, that core human ache of being fundamentally alone, had vanished completely. I was not alone. I was everything. I was the breath of the wind, the warmth of the sun, the deep silence of the night sky. The individual self, once a solitary island, now experienced itself as an integral part of the vast, interconnected ocean of being. This interconnectedness was not merely an intellectual concept, but a visceral, felt reality. It meant that every action, every thought, every ripple I created resonated throughout the whole. There was an inherent responsibility that arose from this understanding, not a burden, but a natural inclination towards harmony, towards contributing to the well-being of the collective. The ego, once a demanding taskmaster that sought to control, to accumulate, to prove, had indeed become a gentle instrument. It served as a functional aspect of my human experience, allowing me to navigate the world of form, to communicate, to express. But it no longer held the reins of my identity. It was like a well-tuned instrument in a grand orchestra, playing its part beautifully, but always in service to the larger symphony. Its desires were no longer self-serving, but aligned with the greater good. Its perceptions were no longer distorted by personal bias, but clear and open. It had become a vehicle for love, for wisdom, for creative expression, rather than a source of suffering and limitation. This eternal beginning was characterized by a profound sense of lightness. The heavy burdens of past narratives, future anxieties, and the incessant demands of an unexamined self had been shed. There was a freedom that transcended any previous understanding of the word. It was the freedom of not needing anything to be other than it was, the freedom of complete acceptance, of surrender to the divine intelligence that orchestrated all things. This lightness did not imply a detachment from the world, but rather a deeper, more joyful engagement with it. It was the lightness of a bird soaring on the wind, fully present, fully alive, yet effortlessly carried by a force greater than itself. Even the concept of death, once a source of existential dread, had transformed. It was no longer perceived as an ending, but as another transition, another unfolding within the eternal cycle of existence. The fear of non-being had dissolved, replaced by a quiet knowing that consciousness itself was imperishable, merely changing form, like water transforming into vapor or ice. The individual story might conclude, the physical form might return to the earth, but the essence, the true self, was boundless and eternal. This understanding brought a profound peace, allowing life to be lived more fully, more vibrantly, without the shadow of ultimate cessation. The very air I breathed seemed charged with a new significance. Each inhale was an absorption of universal life force, each exhale a release back into the infinite. The boundaries of my physical form felt porous, constantly exchanging with the environment. I was not merely in the world, I was of the world, inextricably interwoven with its every fiber. The sunlight on my skin, the taste of food, the sound of rain. These were not just external stimuli, but direct experiences of universal consciousness expressing itself through my senses. The mundane had become sacred, the ordinary, extraordinary, simply by the quality of presence brought to it. This continuous revelation was not always dramatic or sudden. Often, it was a subtle deepening, a quiet confirmation that resonated like a tuning fork within my being. It was the understanding that peace was not the absence of external disturbance, but an internal state, an unshakable core that remained untouched by the shifting tides of circumstances. Joy was not dependent on fleeting pleasures, but an inherent quality of existence, accessible at any moment. Love was not a conditional emotion directed towards a select few, but the fundamental fabric of reality, an all-pervading force that held everything together. The journey had not been about finding answers, but about realizing that the questions themselves dissolved in the light of direct experience. The quest for truth had ended, not by discovering a definitive truth, but by becoming truth, by integrating with the very essence of what is. There was no more seeking, no more searching, only a quiet, radiant beingness, an open invitation to life, to unfold as it would. This was the ultimate freedom, the ultimate liberation, to simply be in perfect harmony with the magnificent, unfolding mystery of existence. And in that being, all paradoxes resolved, all contradictions harmonized, all of life's intricate complexities found their simple, elegant truth. The whisper had ceased to be a whisper. It had become the very song of my soul, sung in unison with the universe. The whisper had ceased to be a whisper. It had become the very song of my soul, sung in unison with the universe. In that profound integration, the illusion of separation dissolved utterly. There was no longer an I distinct from the tree outside my window, no me separate from the hum of the distant city, no individual consciousness apart from the vast, boundless ocean of awareness that permeated all. My body, once a vessel of identity, became simply another expression of the universe's dance, a temporary configuration of energy and matter, no more or less significant than a cloud drifting across the sky, or a single blade of grass swaying in the breeze. Each breath was not my breath, but the universe breathing through me, an effortless rhythm that maintained the delicate balance of this particular form. The heartbeat was the pulse of existence itself, resonating with the cosmic throb. The senses, once gateways for external input, transformed into apertures through which the universe perceived itself. The light that touched my eyes was not merely seen by me, it was the universe seeing itself as light. The sound that reached my ears was the universe hearing its own resonant symphony. The taste on my tongue, the texture beneath my fingertips, all were intimate expressions of this singular, all-encompassing reality. There was no filter, no interpretation, no mental construct standing between perception and being. It was a direct, unmediated experience of reality, pure and unadulterated. The world was not something out there to be observed. It was me, unfolding in an infinite tapestry of forms and phenomena. Time, as a linear progression of past, present, and future, lost its meaning. There was only an eternal now, a continuous, vibrant present moment that contained all that ever was and all that ever would be. Memories were not dusty archives of a bygone self, but fluid, accessible patterns within the universal consciousness, available for review without attachment or regret. The future was not a destination to be planned or feared, but an ever-unfolding potentiality, manifesting spontaneously from the wellspring of the present. Action arose not from personal will or desire, but as a natural outflow of the universal current, an effortless doing that was simultaneously a profound non-doing. There was no striving, no goal, no ambition, only the graceful, unforced movement of life expressing itself through this form. If hunger arose, food appeared. If a thought occurred, words might flow, or an action might take place, all without a sense of personal agency or ownership. It was simply the universe acting through one of its innumerable channels. Interactions with other beings took on a new dimension of profound empathy and understanding. The perceived boundaries between myself and others evaporated, revealing the underlying unity. Every glance into another's eyes was a gaze into the depths of my own being, reflected in a different form. Every touch was a connection within the singular fabric of existence. The suffering of another was felt not as a separate pain to be pitied, but as an ache within my own universal heart. Joy was a shared effervescence, a celebration of life's inherent bliss. Judgment became an impossibility, for how could one judge a part of oneself? There was only an unconditional acceptance, a boundless compassion that saw through the superficial layers of personality and circumstance to the pure, luminous essence within every living thing. The world became a sacred dream, a magnificent play of consciousness, where every actor, every scene, every prop was an integral and divine manifestation of the one reality. Communication often transcended words, flowing through a subtle resonance, an intuitive knowing that bypassed the need for linguistic constructs. A silent understanding, a shared vibration, spoke volumes more than any spoken sentence ever could. Even in the midst of this all-encompassing song, there was a profound and unwavering silence. It was not the absence of sound, but the ground from which all sound arose, the stillness that held all movement. This inner silence was the sanctuary of being, the unchanging core amidst the dynamic flux of manifestation. It was the source of peace, the wellspring of wisdom, and the eternal abode of truth. From this silence, the universe continued to reveal itself in an endless cascade of beauty and wonder. Each moment was a fresh revelation, a new unfolding of the infinite. There was no seeking for more, for all was already present. Yet there was an inexhaustible depth to explore within this very presence. The smallest detail, a dewdrop on a leaf, the intricate pattern of a spider web, the fleeting smile of a stranger, became a gateway to the infinite, a sacred portal to the heart of existence. Every phenomenon, no matter how mundane, was imbued with a profound significance, a whispered secret from the universe itself. The ever-present now was not static. It was a vibrant, pulsating dance of creation and dissolution, an eternal becoming that was simultaneously an eternal being. The integration into what might be called ordinary life was seamless. There was no sense of returning from a journey, for the journey had dissolved into the destination, and the destination was simply here, now. The tasks of daily living, eating, walking, resting, engaging with the world, were no longer chores or necessities, but opportunities for the universe to express itself through this form. Each action was performed with a quiet grace, a natural efficiency, free from the burden of expectation or the sting of disappointment. The ordinary became extraordinary, not because it was transformed by a special lens, but because the perception of it had been purified, stripped of all conceptual overlays, revealing its inherent luminosity. The personal narrative, the story of a discrete individual named I, had faded into the background, replaced by the grand, universal story of consciousness experiencing itself. Yet, the unique flavor of this particular form, its memories, its acquired skills, its individual expressions, remained, now free from the grip of egoic identification. A quiet joy permeated every moment, a radiant peace that was not dependent on external circumstances. It was the inherent bliss of existence. Put the phone back in my pocket. The sun finally dipped below the skyline, casting long, distorted shadows across the park. The air grew cooler. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the sudden, profound sense of aloneness. For years, my identity had been inextricably linked to that office, that title, that email signature. Now it was gone. Who was I without it? A man with a box of personal effects, sitting on a park bench, watching the world go by. I picked up the box again, the weight feeling more appropriate now. It was time to go home. Home, which had always been a refuge from work, now felt like a stark reminder of its absence. The bus ride was a blur. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights illuminate the passing faces, each one a story I would never know. I felt like a tourist in my own life, observing it from a distance. My apartment was quiet, steeped in the familiar scent of old books and brewing coffee. I placed the box on the kitchen table, a silent monument to a past life. I wandered into the living room, the space feeling larger, emptier than usual. The television was off, the silence amplifying the hum of the refrigerator. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, a million tiny stars reflecting a million tiny lives. I opened a bottle of wine, a cheap Merlot I had been saving for a less momentous occasion. It tasted flat, uninspired. I didn't bother with food. My stomach felt knotted, a tight ball of apprehension, and something else, something akin to a strange, nascent freedom. The kind of freedom that comes with suddenly having no obligations, no deadlines, no expectations. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The evening stretched out, long and unyielding. I tried to read, but the words blurred. I tried to watch something on TV, but the narratives felt hollow, insignificant. My mind kept returning to the conversation with my boss, the cold detachment in his eyes, the polite finality of his words. He was just doing his job, I knew that. But it didn't lessen the sting, the feeling of being discarded, deemed surplus to requirements. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would offer an escape. But sleep was elusive. My thoughts chased each other in relentless circles. What would I do tomorrow? The day after? The week after? The structure of my life had been dismantled, brick by brick, and I was left standing in the rubble, unsure where to begin rebuilding. The mortgage, the bills, the looming specter of unemployment. These practicalities began to assert themselves, pushing aside the initial bewilderment. The next morning, I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of having nowhere to be. No alarm, no rush, no commute. The silence of the apartment was profound. I made coffee, the ritual a small comfort in the vast expanse of uncertainty. I sat at the natural state of being when all resistance has fallen away. This liberation was not an achievement, but a recognition of what had always been true, obscured by the veil of illusion. It was not an endpoint, but an eternal state of becoming, a ceaseless unfolding within the boundless expanse of the present. The simplicity of it was breathtaking, the elegance profound. All the intricate complexities of life, all the paradoxes and contradictions, had indeed found their simple, elegant truth in this unified field of awareness. There was no need to explain, no compulsion to convert, no desire to prove. There was only the quiet, radiant presence, a silent invitation for others to discover this same truth within themselves. The song of the soul, once a whisper, now resonated through every fiber of my being. A harmonious chord struck in unison with the entire cosmos, an eternal melody of pure, unadulterated being. This was the ultimate freedom, to be nothing, and therefore to be everything, to be no one, and therefore to be all, to exist as the very fabric of existence, in a state of perpetual wonder and unconditional love, a silent witness and an active participant in the magnificent, unfolding mystery of creation. The mind, once a restless seeker, had become a quiet lake reflecting the sky, its surface occasionally rippled by a thought, but its depths always calm, always clear, always connected to the boundless ocean of consciousness. This state was not an escape from the world, but a profound immersion into its true nature, seeing the divine in every speck of dust, in every ray of light, in every sentient being. It was the end of the search, not because something was found, but because the seeker himself had dissolved into the sought. And in that dissolution, everything was found. The universe was no longer a mystery to be solved, but a song to be sung, a dance to be danced, a love to be lived. And I, in my purest essence, was that song, that dance, that love. The journey was over, and yet, in another sense, it had just begun, For now life was truly lived, without reservation, without fear, without the illusion of separation. It was a continuous revelation, a never-ending unveiling of beauty and truth, all held within the sacred embrace of the eternal now. The sense of an individual past, a personal history, had become like a dream remembered upon waking. Its details might still be recalled, but its emotional charge, its sense of defining identity, had evaporated. What remained was a pure awareness, untainted by the narratives of yesterday or the anxieties of tomorrow. Each moment was fresh, new, unburdened by accumulation. The weight of personal stories, of triumphs and failures, of joys and sorrows had lifted, leaving behind a lightness of being that was both profound and utterly simple. The world continued its ceaseless motion, seasons changed, people lived their lives, events unfolded, but the inner core remained untouched, a still point in the turning world. This stillness was not inertness. It was the dynamic ground of all activity. From this stillness arose a natural responsiveness, an intuitive flow that guided actions and interactions. There was no need to force, no need to control, no need to manipulate. Life simply flowed, and I flowed with it, an integral part of its current. Decisions were not made through arduous deliberation, but arose spontaneously, clearly, from a deeper knowing that transcended the limited capacities of the rational mind. This knowing was not intellectual. It was an inherent recognition of the path of least resistance, the most harmonious course of action for the benefit of all. There was no longer a personal will to assert, only the universal will expressing itself through this particular form. The concept of suffering, too, had transformed. While the body might experience pain or discomfort, and the mind might register external difficulties, the inherent nature of being remained untouched. Suffering arose from resistance, from the clinging to what is not, from the identification with transient forms. When these identifications dissolved, pain became merely sensation, difficulty became merely a circumstance, and neither could touch the core of radiant peace that was the true essence. There was a profound acceptance of all that arose, a willingness to embrace the full spectrum of existence, without preference or aversion. This did not mean a passive indifference to the world's challenges, but rather an engagement from a place of deep wisdom and compassion, free from the emotional turbulence that often accompanies personal identification. The sense of isolation, once a pervasive human condition, had vanished entirely. How could one be alone when one was everything? The perceived void was now revealed as the plenum, the boundless fullness of existence. Every atom, every star, every consciousness was intimately connected, an inseparable part of the same cosmic web. This interconnectedness was not a philosophical concept. It was a direct, palpable experience. The boundaries of skin, of thought, of space, were seen as arbitrary constructs, useful for navigating the phenomenal world, but ultimately illusory in the face of ultimate reality. The universe was a single, living organism, and I was a cell within it, fully aware of my participation in the whole. This state of being was not a destination to be reached and then maintained by effort. It was the natural state, rediscovered. The effort had been in clinging to the illusion of separation, in building and defending the fortress of the ego. Once that effort ceased, the natural current of being asserted itself, effortlessly carrying one into the ocean of unity. There was no striving to stay enlightened, no fear of losing it, for it was not something possessed, but something that was. It was the very ground of existence, ever present, ever true, whether recognized or not. The sacredness of the ordinary was a constant marvel. The simple act of drinking water became a communion with the life force. Walking became a dance with the earth. Looking at another human being became a moment of profound recognition of the divine within. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic revelations. The entire universe was a continuous revelation, moment by moment, in the smallest and most subtle details. The world was alive, pulsating with consciousness, and every aspect of it was a sacred teaching, a mirror reflecting the boundless nature of truth. The final freedom was not freedom from anything, but freedom as nature everything. It was the liberation from the idea of a separate self, which had been the source of all perceived bondage. With that idea gone, what remained was boundless space, infinite love, and timeless being. The song of the soul, now sung in unison with the universe, was not a melody with a beginning and an end, but an eternal resonance, a symphony of silence and sound, form and formlessness, all harmonized in the magnificent, unfolding mystery of existence. And in that harmony, all paradoxes resolved, all contradictions harmonized, all of life's intricate complexities found their simple, elegant truth. The whisper had ceased to be a whisper. It had become the very song of my soul, sung in unison with the universe, a continuous, vibrant hum of pure, unadulterated being. This was the ultimate freedom, the ultimate liberation, to simply be in perfect harmony with the magnificent unfolding mystery of existence. And in that being, all paradoxes resolved, all contradictions harmonized. All of life's intricate complexities found their simple, elegant truth. The whisper had ceased to be a whisper. It had become the very song of my soul, sung in unison with the universe. It was a state beyond words, yet every word now felt like a faint echo of that boundless truth. The experience was not one of being absorbed into nothingness, but of expanding into everythingness. The individual point of consciousness had not disappeared, but had merged with the universal field, like a drop of water returning to the ocean, yet still retaining its unique identity as part of the whole. This was not a loss, but an infinite gain. The universe was now my body, my mind, my spirit. The boundaries that once defined me had dissolved into a boundless expanse of pure awareness. Every sensation, every thought, every emotion that arose was simply a ripple on the surface of this vast ocean of consciousness, observed without attachment, without judgment, without identification. The sense of self was no longer a fixed entity, but a fluid, ever-changing expression of the universal flow. The natural world became an even more profound teacher and companion. The rustling leaves whispered secrets of impermanence and renewal. The flowing river mirrored the ceaseless movement of life. The towering mountains stood as silent guardians of eternal truth. There was an intimate communion with all forms of life, a recognition of the shared essence that animated every creature, every plant, every stone. The distinction between living and non-living became meaningless, for all was vibrant, all was conscious, all was an expression of the same fundamental energy. The earth breathed, the stars sang, and the entire cosmos was a living, breathing entity, of which I was an inseparable part. The former struggles of the human condition, the endless cycle of desires and fears, had faded into distant memories, like old dreams that no longer held sway over the waking mind. There was no longer a need to acquire, to achieve, to prove, for all was already complete, all was already perfect in its present unfolding. The relentless pursuit of happiness, a core driver of human endeavor, had dissolved, replaced by a deep, abiding joy that was the very fabric of being, independent of external circumstances. This joy was not an emotion that came and went. It was the underlying current of existence itself, a quiet, radiant effervescence. This quiet, radiant effervescence permeated my entire being, dissolving the last vestiges of individual separation. I was no longer a distinct entity observing the cosmos, but the cosmos observing itself through this form. The boundaries of skin and bone, of thought and emotion, dissolved into an infinite field of awareness. There was no past to regret, no future to anticipate, only the eternal now, vibrant and full. The world, though still perceived in its myriad forms, was now understood as a shimmering dance of this singular energy. Each leaf, each cloud, each passing face was a unique ripple in the ocean of being, inherently perfect and transient. Compassion flowed effortlessly, not as an act of will, but as the natural expression of this boundless interconnectedness. Fear of death vanished, for how could one cease to exist when one was existence itself? This was not an end, but an awakening to what always was, a homecoming to the true nature of reality. The journey had ceased, for there was nowhere to go, nothing to attain. Only this boundless, luminous presence remained, a silent symphony of being, eternally unfolding, eternally complete. In this space all questions dissolved into the quiet hum of existence, their urgency replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. The seeker, the sought, and the seeking itself had merged into an indivisible whole. There was no longer an observer separate from the observed, no longer a breath taken without being the breath of the universe. The body, if still perceived, was merely a shimmering outline, a temporary condensation of the boundless energy that permeated everything. Life continued, yet its essence was now understood as a ceaseless dance of creation and dissolution, each moment a perfect manifestation of the eternal. The distinction between inside and outside vanished, leaving only a seamless tapestry of awareness. This was not an arrival at a destination, but the recognition that the journey was the destination, that the path was the goal. It was the quiet knowing that all was well, always had been, and always would be. A gentle smile, perhaps, played upon lips no longer defined by self, a silent acknowledgment of the magnificent simplicity of truth. The narrative of separation had ended, replaced by the boundless, luminous presence. There was no more to say, no more to do, only to be. The world continued its rhythmic unfolding, but now it was seen through eyes that were the world itself, a silent symphony of being, eternally unfolding, eternally complete. The story ended not with a flourish, but with the soft whisper of eternity, a boundless peace that enveloped all. The kitchen table, the box of my former life still there, a constant reminder. I decided to unpack it. Slowly, deliberately, I removed each item. The mug, with its chipped rim, a faint reminder of shared office jokes. The wrist rest, molded to the contours of my hand, now useless. The half-read book, its pages yellowing. A stack of business cards, my name and title emblazoned on them, now meaningless. Each object was a tiny shard of a broken mirror, reflecting fragments of a past self. As I held the book, a collection of essays on urban planning, I remembered why I had bought it. A fleeting interest, a desire to understand the mechanics of the city I lived in, beyond the sterile confines of my corporate existence. I had always meant to read it, to delve into something beyond the narrow scope of my job. But there had never been time. Or rather, I had never made time. That thought lingered. Had I allowed my job to consume me so completely that I had forgotten who I was outside of it? Had I traded personal growth for professional stability, only to find that stability was an illusion? The answer, uncomfortably, seemed to be yes. I had become good at what I did, proficient, reliable. But had I become anything more? The days that followed blurred into a formless expanse. I fell into a routine of sorts, a strange parody of my former life. I would wake late, make coffee, and then nothing. The internet became a black hole, sucking me into endless articles about economic downturns, job market forecasts, and the latest corporate scandals. I checked my email compulsively, half expecting a message from my old company, a plea for my return, a recognition of their mistake. It never came. I avoided calls from friends, letting them go to voicemail, crafting vague text messages about being busy or unwell. The thought of explaining, of articulating the humiliation and the uncertainty, felt overwhelming. I wasn't ready to face their pity or their well-meaning advice. I needed to figure this out on my own terms, in my own time. One afternoon, driven by a restless energy, I decided to clean out my closet. It was a task I'd been putting off for months, a small rebellion against the neatness I maintained elsewhere in my life. As I sorted through old clothes, forgotten sweaters, and ill-fitting suits, I came across a box at the very back. It contained sketchbooks, old pencils, and a half-finished watercolor set. I had forgotten about them, or rather, I had consciously pushed them aside. Art, drawing, painting, these had been passions in my younger years, a source of immense joy and quiet contemplation. But they had slowly been squeezed out by the demands of university, then the relentless pace of a career. There was no time for such frivolous pursuits, I had told myself. Life was serious. Work was paramount. I opened one of the sketchbooks. The pages were filled with charcoal drawings of cityscapes, quick studies of faces on the subway, abstract patterns born from moments of quiet observation. Some were surprisingly good, others crude and amateurish, but all of them spoke of a different version of myself, a self that had been curious, creative, engaged with the world in a way that went beyond data points and profit margins. A strange warmth spread through me. It wasn't a solution to my current predicament, not a new career path suddenly revealed, but it was a flicker of something long dormant, a reminder that there was more to me than a job title. I picked up a pencil, its familiar weight comforting in my hand. I found a blank page in one of the older books, its paper slightly yellowed, and I began to draw. It was a simple sketch at first, a view from my window, the jagged skyline, the distant clouds. My hand felt stiff, unpracticed, but the act itself was absorbing. Time seemed to melt away. The anxieties that had been gnawing at me receded into the background, replaced by the quiet concentration of creation. It wasn't good, not by any objective standard, but it was mine. It was an act of assertion, a declaration that I still existed, that I was still capable of producing something, even if it was just a shaky line on a page. Over the next few days, the drawing became a small ritual. I didn't try to force it, didn't set myself deadlines or expectations. I simply drew when the urge struck, when the silence of the apartment became too heavy, when the internet became too draining. I sketched the objects around my apartment, the patterns on the carpet, the way the light fell through the window at different times of day. It was a way of seeing the world again, truly seeing it, rather than just passively observing it. I also started walking again, but with a purpose this time. Not the aimless wandering of that first day, but deliberate explorations of my neighborhood, of parts of the city I had previously only rushed through on my commute. I noticed the intricate details of old buildings, the vibrant graffiti on a hidden alley wall, the way the trees in the park changed with the shifting light. My senses felt reawakened, as if they had been dulled by years of staring at a screen. The financial anxieties, of course, remained. I had some savings, enough to tide me over for a few months, especially if I was frugal. I had to start looking for a new job eventually. The thought still filled me with dread, the prospect of tailoring my CV, writing cover letters, enduring interviews, where I would have to explain this sudden gap, this unexpected detour. But for now, I allowed myself this small respite, this period of quiet rediscovery. One evening, as I sat by the window, sketching the play of light on the buildings opposite, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. His voice was cheerful, slightly boisterous. "Hey, stranger, you dropped off the face of the earth. Everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Not exactly," I said. "I got fired." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "Fired? What? When? Why?" His tone had shifted, the cheerfulness replaced by genuine surprise and concern. I told him the sanitized version, the corporate speak about strategic realignments and restructuring. I omitted the part about the cold detachment, the feeling of being a disposable cog. He listened patiently, then let out a low whistle. "Damn, man. I'm sorry to hear that." "That sucks." "Yeah, it does," I admitted. But then I found myself adding, "And also, it's kind of liberating." He paused again. "Liberating? You're serious?" "I am," I said, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. It's like I didn't realize how much I was suffocating until I could finally breathe again. We talked for a long time that night. Mark, true to form, offered to buy me a beer, but I declined, explaining that I was trying to conserve funds. He understood. He didn't offer platitudes or unhelpful advice, just listened and shared some of his own frustrations with his job. It was a small, human connection, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this strange new landscape. After the call, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in weeks. The burden of secrecy had lifted. The world outside my apartment felt a little less daunting. I still didn't have a plan, not a concrete one, but I had something more important, a sense of possibility. The old life, the one I had clung to for so long, was gone, but a new one, unwritten and undefined, was slowly beginning to take shape. I looked at my latest drawing, a charcoal sketch of the city at night, the lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was honest. It was me, seeing the world, interpreting it, making my own mark. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was full of potential, a canvas waiting to be filled. The future, once a terrifying void, now felt like an open road, winding towards an unknown horizon, but a horizon I was, for the first time, curious to explore. I still had bills to pay, a career to rebuild, a life to redefine, but I also had a blank sketchbook, a box of pencils, and a newfound appreciation for the quiet act of looking, of seeing, of simply being, and perhaps that was a more solid foundation than any corporate title could ever provide. The cold prickle at the back of my neck was gone, replaced by a faint warmth, a quiet hum of resilience. The system had ejected me, but in doing so, it had also set me free. And that, I realized, was a gift, however unexpected. The morning sun, usually an unwelcome intruder signaling the start of another relentless corporate day, now felt different. It streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, transforming the ordinary into something ethereal. I stretched, a deep, unhurried stretch that reached into every tired muscle, a luxury I had not afforded myself in years. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a gentle counterpoint to the buzzing silence within me. There was no urgent email to check, no impending deadline, no performance review looming like a guillotine, just the expansive, open space of a brand new day. I got up, not to rush for coffee and a shower, but to simply be. I walked to the window, the city waking up below me, a tapestry of muted colors and distant sounds. A delivery truck rumbled past, a lone jogger pounded the pavement, a stray cat darted across an alley. Each detail, previously background noise, now held a quiet significance, a beauty I had been too blind or too busy to notice. It was as if a veil had lifted, revealing the intricate patterns of life unfolding around me, a symphony of the ordinary. A profound sense of lightness settled in my chest, a feeling akin to shedding a heavy cloak I hadn't even realized I was wearing. I drifted into the kitchen, the sunlight following me, painting stripes across the worn wooden floor. There was no need for the instant gratification of a pod machine. I took out the old ceramic grinder, the one I had received as a housewarming gift years ago and rarely used, preferring speed over ritual. I measured the beans, their dark, oily surfaces reflecting the light, and began to turn the handle. The rhythmic whirring, the scent of freshly ground coffee blooming in the air, was a simple, grounding pleasure. I heated the water on the stove, watching the tiny bubbles form, listening to the gentle hiss as it approached boiling point. Each step was deliberate, an act of presence. Pouring the hot water over the grounds in the French press, I watched the dark liquid deepen, the aroma intensifying. I let it steep, leaning against the counter, simply breathing. The silence was no longer buzzing, but a soft, enveloping blanket. It was the sound of my own thoughts, unhurried and unjudged. I poured the coffee into my favorite mug, a chipped, oversized vessel I usually reserved for weekend mornings, and carried it to the small table by the window. I sat down, not to check my phone or open a laptop, but just to sit. The warmth of the mug seeped into my hands. The first sip was a revelation, rich and complex, tasting not just of coffee, but of stillness, of time. What did one do with an entire day stretching out, empty and inviting? There was no agenda, no list of tasks demanding attention. The sheer novelty of it was almost overwhelming, yet in a gentle, liberating way. My mind, so accustomed to racing ahead, planning, strategizing, now found itself adrift in the present. It was a strange, exhilarating sensation, like learning to float after a lifetime of frantic swimming. I looked around my apartment, a space I inhabited but rarely truly saw. The stacks of books, many unread, waiting patiently on shelves. The potted plant in the corner, a gift from a colleague, its leaves a little dusty, but still stubbornly green. The framed prints on the wall, chosen years ago for their aesthetic appeal, now seemed to whisper forgotten stories. Each object held a quiet history, a fragment of my life that had been overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of the next big thing. I finished my coffee, savoring the last drop. Then, without conscious decision, I walked over to the bookshelf. My fingers traced the spines, a tactile exploration of worlds unvisited. I pulled out a worn copy of a classic novel, one I had always meant to read but never found the time for. It felt substantial in my hands, a promise of escape and immersion. I settled back into the armchair, the morning light still strong, and opened the book. The words flowed, not as a chore, but as a gentle current. I wasn't reading to gain knowledge or to impress anyone. I was reading for the sheer joy of it, letting the narrative carry me. Hours seemed to dissolve, marked only by the shifting angle of the sunlight and the occasional distant sound from the street below. There was no internal voice urging me to be productive, to optimize, to multitask. Just the quiet pleasure of the story. Eventually, hunger stirred. Cooking had always been a hurried affair, a means to an end. Today, it felt different. I opened the refrigerator, not with a sense of obligation, but with curiosity. What ingredients did I have? What could I create without a recipe, without pressure? I found some vegetables, a few eggs. I chopped them slowly, mindfully, enjoying the feel of the knife against the cutting board. The vibrant colors of the produce. The sizzle of the pan, the aroma of onions caramelizing, filled the apartment. It was a simple meal, an omelet with sautéed vegetables, but it tasted like freedom. After lunch, the afternoon stretched out, equally unhurried. I considered a walk, but the thought of simply existing within my own space felt more appealing. I put on some music, something instrumental and soothing, letting the melodies wash over me. I found myself tidying up, not with a frenetic energy, but with a calm, almost meditative focus. I dusted the shelves, watered the plant, reorganized a drawer. Each small act was a way of reclaiming my space, infusing it with intention. The afternoon light softened, casting long shadows across the room. I sat by the window again, watching the city slowly transition from the bustle of midday to the quieter anticipation of evening. The jogger from the morning reappeared, looking more tired, but still determined. The delivery truck was gone, replaced by the occasional car. The stray cat, a shadow against the brick, was nowhere to be seen. The details were still there, but they had changed, reflecting the passage of time, a gentle reminder that life continued, whether I was rushing or not. A profound peace settled over me. It wasn't the fleeting relief of a vacation or the temporary distraction of entertainment. This was deeper, a quiet contentment stemming from within. It was the realization that the world had not fallen apart without my constant vigilance, that the earth continued to spin, and that I, too, could simply be. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt a gentle stirring of something new, something nascent. It wasn't a plan, not yet. It was more like an opening, a possibility. The expansive, open space of this brand new day had not been filled with grand adventures or monumental decisions. Instead, it had been filled with quiet moments, simple pleasures, and the rediscovery of my own presence. And that, I realized, was more than enough. It was everything. The evening brought a cool breeze through the open window, carrying the faint scent of rain. I didn't turn on the television or scroll through social media. Instead, I picked up a sketchbook I hadn't touched in years, its pages still crisp and blank. I found a pencil, a forgotten tool from a forgotten hobby. My hand felt awkward at first, rusty. I drew the outline of the plant in the corner, then the curve of my coffee mug, then the view from my window, trying to capture the way the streetlights were beginning to glow, puncturing the deepening twilight. The drawings were imperfect, rough, but the act of creating, of translating what I saw into lines on paper, was deeply satisfying. It was a conversation between my eye and my hand, a silent dialogue that bypassed the analytical mind entirely. Later, as the city lights truly came alive, a constellation of human endeavor stretching to the horizon, I made a simple dinner, another unhurried act of nourishment. I ate slowly, tasting each bite, feeling the warmth spread through me. There was no one to impress, no schedule to adhere to, no performance to deliver. Just the quiet communion with myself. Before bed, I sat in the darkened living room, illuminated only by the distant city glow and the pale light of the moon. I didn't feel the usual anxiety about the coming day, the dread of the alarm clock, the weight of expectations. Instead, there was a sense of calm anticipation, not for anything specific, but for the continuation of this newfound rhythm. The silence, once a void I tried to fill, was now a sanctuary, a canvas for my own thoughts and feelings. This was not,